everyone to today's video, how to critically appraise a qualitative research study. And I'm going to be doing this systematically with lots of key tips. And I'll also be working through an example open access qualitative research paper later to show you how these pointers relate. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you do, don't forget to give it a like on YouTube. So I'm going to start with just some key points of what critical appraisal is, what you'll be doing. So you're going to be systematically examining a research study, and there's two key things that you're appraising. You're assessing and evaluating the quality of the study, how it was conducted, and then its value to the area. So the relevance of the research to the current evidence base, its transferability or generalizability. Where can the study findings be used, for example? So is it transferable to, if it was conducted in a hospital, it might not be transferable to a community setting, or if it was conducted in an outpatient, it might not be transferable towards, and it's different for all different types of studies. You're looking for strengths, limitations or weaknesses of the study, and you're assessing and evaluating how rigorous the researcher was and how reliable the study is. So rigor and reliability is essentially looking at the quality of the study, how careful or exact the researcher has been, how thorough they've been. So have you got enough information, for example, to repeat the study? Are there key details missing? So you're appraising the research paper details, and I'll be doing that later with an actual paper, looking at data collection, how they recruited participants. You're checking that they ensured there was no coercion, no pressure on participants to take part, for example. Did they justify their sampling procedures? Is there ethical approval? And that shows rigorous processes have been adhered to and would ensure that there's confidentiality of participants and anonymity. Validity in qualitative studies links to accuracy of findings. So it could link to how the researchers prevented or decreased researcher bias or respondent bias, for example. So does the researcher acknowledge limitations and potential biases, and how did they try and decrease biases, for example, using random sampling? So you're presenting a balanced and objective view when you're writing up a critical appraisal if you're doing modules, and you're also having to justify your points. You're not just describing the positives and the negatives of the paper, you're also going to have to find some references to support your appraisal. So for example, if the sampling approach was really clear, or it wasn't clear, then you would use a reference. You can state that, but then you need to use a reference that says that sampling approaches should be clear in research studies to underpin your point. So a few key resources you might want to check out before you start your critical appraisal. There's lots of critical appraisal tools and checklists out there. I think I read somewhere there's about 80 appraisal tools out there currently. And I'll signpost some critical appraisal tools and checklists. And they help assess the strengths and weaknesses of the study with sort of key questions. There's a really good open access reference from Calvin Morley and Cathela 2019, How to Appraise Research, Qualitative Research. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, you're needing to find references that state what good qualitative research looks like. So it might be a good reference to use to underpin the pointers that you're making. They talk of authenticity, the purpose of research, sampling, methodology, findings, for example, of what a good paper should look like. And similarly, the critical appraisal tools have those key headings of methodology, data collection, etc. So hopefully those resources might help. I also have a helpful free video on my YouTube channel, Qualitative, Quantitative and Mixed Methods Research, and that explains the differences between those different research designs, different data collections and analysis methods that align to those different research approaches. So it's helpful because if you're evaluating a paper, you can see if there's any misalignment or inconsistencies in the study that you're appraising. So I mentioned critical appraisal skills checklists, and you can download them free on the Critical Appraisal Skills Programme website. It's a world-renowned website. It hosts free checklists that you can use and for free, and it covers checklists for systematic reviews, qualitative studies, randomised control trials, cohort studies, case studies, diagnostic studies and economic evaluation, for example. There's also the Mixed Methods Appraisal tool, the MMAT from Hong et al. 2018. There is other Mixed Methods Appraisal tools, but this is one example. And the references for this talk are all at the end of the talk. You can use this tool to appraise qualitative research, randomised control trials, non-randomised studies, quantitative descriptive studies, or mixed method studies. So I'm going to give you some key pointers for appraisal, and I'm going to use this open access paper, Back to the Roots of Nursing, Qualitative Study on the Experience of Nurses in the Front Line during the COVID-19 Pandemic, from Anna de Benedictis et al. And I'm going to give a few pointers, and then I'll go through sort of the access paper and highlight some key areas. So I hope you find that helpful. So initially, when we're appraising a research paper, we're looking at the title, the abstract and the author, and we're looking at, for strengths and weaknesses, does the title align with the study that was conducted? So from your title and abstract, the authors should make it clear what type of study it is, how it was conducted, along with the findings. So what's the intention of the researcher, the aim or purpose of the study? Is there a research question or problem stated? Is it clear where the study was conducted, the setting? Does it make clear the study design and the methods used? So in qualitative studies, you're going to see data collection methods such as interviews or focus groups, and you might see data analysis of narrative using thematic analysis, for example. So does the methodology and methods align with a qualitative study? And that's where my video on qualitative and quantitative research might help here, as it sets out which designs and methods and analytical methods link to which research approaches. Do the researchers state the overall findings, conclusions? Is it set in context with the current evidence base? So does it link to a theoretical or conceptual theory? And it really depends on the type of study. But you're generally looking for alignment between the research design, the methods, the approach used, and that should align with the discussion and the findings. So, for example, I found a study, from the title, it was a study exploring nurse-patient communication at the bedside. So that was the title. But when I appraised the paper and I looked at the abstract, it focused on nurses' time spent on computers away from the patient. And the researchers were observing the nurses at the computer in an office, not at the bedside. And they were speaking how it impacted on nurses' communication. So the title didn't necessarily align with the abstract, and it wasn't included in my literature review, for example. So you're looking for that alignment. You also need to appraise, is the journal reputable and has the article been peer reviewed? Because you might see some journals on Google that are not on healthcare databases. So usually librarians and healthcare databases share journals that are reputable. But you do need to check that it's been peer reviewed. Who are the authors? Are their roles, qualifications appropriate for the study conducted? Do they have the expertise to be doing this research and presenting their data? So if we now look at the open access paper by De Benedictis, from the title it clearly states it's a qualitative study, and it uses the words experiences, so they're examining nurses' experiences, which aligns clearly to a qualitative research approach. And it details the type of study participants, which are nurses, which setting, so nurses on the front line, and the context, so capturing nurses' experiences during the COVID pandemic. So this is clear. The area and investigation clearly aligns to a qualitative research approach in this title. The journal is called Frontiers in Medicine, and it's not one that I've personally come across regularly, but I found the paper on the Healthcare Library database, Medline, and it's a peer-reviewed journal. You can see who the authors are and their affiliation to hospitals and universities. They're not specifically stating their role on the paper, but you can see where they work. And so the researchers are reputable. The researcher's area of work relates to the topic area and aligns with the study aims. So if we look at the abstract, it's not written with headings. So often when you see abstracts in journals, they'll have key headings, but that is dependent on the author guidelines. So what does the journal editors want? I've highlighted in yellow some key areas, and it's clear that the purpose of the study was to explore the experiences of nurses in COVID centres in Rome, with a focus on professional motivations, developing professional and technical skills. So the intention of the research is clear. The purpose of the study is clear. There's no research question in the abstract, but in the paper the aims and objectives of the study are given and they're clear. And it's clear where the study was conducted, in a hospital setting. And the abstract makes the study design and methods clear. They used 2 focus groups held with 9 nurses. Narrative data was analysed using inductive content analysis, which is appropriate for qualitative research studies. And the researchers state the overall findings that are summarised under 5 key themes. And again, these themes relate to the aims of the study, which was to focus on nurses' motivations and skills. So the research study aligns according to the abstract, but we're going to go into the paper as well. So it looks like they followed through on their aims with their findings. When you're appraising a paper, it should have a literature review or an introduction where the research topic or the area of interest is set in context. So there should be an up-to-date review of literature, which should include primary empirical studies to give an overview of the current evidence base. And it might also include things like concept analysis or current professional standards to set the scene in the introduction and to give a rationale for the study. It depends on the topic area. But the research should be up to date and as recent as possible, unless it's a seminal study where the researchers need to give an historical perspective. In this paper, the authors presented key literature in their introduction, which I haven't given, but they didn't give details. They didn't give details of how they conducted a literature review. They just gave some papers that set the scene, but they did present key empirical primary studies that informed their study, and this culminated in this final sentence in their introduction. Numerous studies have been carried out to explore the experiences of nurses during the pandemic, but there's limited literature on the possible impact of the pandemic on nurses' motivation as well as the development of skills. So we can clearly see in the introduction and the empirical literature that was presented prior to this paragraph that it clearly aligns to the abstracts and supports the rationale for the study. So if we look at the study design, methods, analysis, we need to know that the researchers have been rigorous, exact and transparent. So the rationale for the study design and methods should be clearly justified. There should be clear recruitment, sampling, data collection procedures detailed, and the researcher needs to make these transparent in the study to reduce bias. So there should be no inconsistencies found between the study design, data collection methods. And in qualitative studies, the researchers should detail how they reduced bias, for example, their sampling approach, acknowledging the researcher's role, peer review, etc. So inclusion and exclusion criteria should be detailed to ensure reliability and that the study is objective. Ethical approval should be made clear, and adherence to local and national ethical procedures to assure confidentiality, anonymity and no participant coercion. The data analysis methods and processes should be clear and that they should align to the data, and the researcher should justify the approaches used and give a rationale. So you should have enough detail as well to conduct a similar study. So you should be able to see a clear alignment from the start to the finish where the findings are presented. So in this open access paper, everything was clearly aligned. So the study design, the methods were clearly presented and justified in this qualitative descriptive research study. It used focus group technique to collect rich information and gave a rationale. The secondary rationale, for example, was choosing the focus group at the time of the study because the focus group technique was chosen because nurses were still very emotionally impacted by their experience in the COVID centres, and it was thought that the opportunity to share their experiences with other colleagues who had the same experience might help them express their opinions better. So there's a real clear justification for the focus group technique that was used in this study. So this is just one bit of an extract, but there's a lot more there. The researchers also detailed data collection and analysis procedures. Clearly, you could see that the focus groups were tape recorded, who set them up, who moderated and facilitated and led the focus groups, how the nurses were guided through those focus groups. And there was a clear topic guide with questions for the nursing participants that was informed by a multidisciplinary panel, which adds rigour to the whole process within this study. So in this open access paper, the sampling and recruitment procedures were made clear by the researchers. An extract of the paper shows that there's 20 participants. They were nurses working in a COVID centre in an Italian hospital. This is a good sample size for a qualitative study like this. You tend to have smaller sample sizes in qualitative descriptive studies like this to obtain rich data. Also, data collection and analysis of narrative like this study can be very time consuming to code and analyse, whereas quantitative experimental trials, for example, you want larger numbers so any adverse effects will come out if you're trialling medication, for example. Purposive sampling was used appropriately here. Now, purposive sampling is where certain participants are chosen because they have certain characteristics that you need in your sample. And the researchers rightly give a rationale. The researchers should always give a rationale for their sampling approach, and they did. So their rationale for using purposive sampling was because it was difficult to recruit nurses during the pandemic, the ward had to be covered, and it was about who was available, who wanted to come to these supportive focus group sessions. So a good rationale was given. Ethical approval in this study was clear. The researchers adhered to local ethical procedures that linked to a hospital and a university. This study took place in Italy, and it's depending on the study, but empirical research, any research involving patients and nurses, we would normally expect a national ethical approval. If it's a quality improvement study, it might be slightly different, but in the UK, the rules for this would be different. But the researcher included informed consent, stated that personal data was kept confidential, and they adhered to ethical approval, and they detail a bit more in their paper, so it was clear. I've chosen this extract because it links to data analysis, but also rigour. The researchers used content analysis. It was used by researchers, which included open coding, category creation and abstraction phase. And this inductive content analysis followed a process that was underpinned by a referenced paper. Two researchers also independently read the transcripts and defined codes and categories, and this promotes rigour. And an independent expert researcher confirmed the codes, categories, and it reduces the potential for researcher bias, and it increases the credibility of the study because it shows peer review. And rigour is also shown through the ethical approval as well. When we appraised the discussion and the study themes, there was 5 themes in the paper's discussion, and they all aligned to the aims of the study and what the researcher had set out to do, because the researcher aim was to explore the experiences of nurses in COVID centres in Rome with a focus on professional motivations and developing professional and technical skills. So you can see here I've chosen this one example, the first theme, and it discusses nurses' motivation and a sense of mission. So there's also example narrative from nurses that relates to the theme to sort of give a rationale for what's underpinning the theme. And this narrative has been anonymised to maintain the nurses' confidentiality, which again is essential to researchers. It's essential that researchers maintain the confidentiality and anonymity of participants so that they can't be identified. And then the researchers go on to conclude findings relating to the current evidence base and a nursing competency framework. So it all aligns really clearly. Looking at appraising the limitations and the conclusion, the implications for education, research and practice are found within the conclusion in the study, and they again align to the study aims and what the researchers have set out to achieve. And it's good to see the study limitations acknowledged by the author. Generalisability was not the goal in this qualitative descriptive study, which is made transparent, and it's correct and aligns to qualitative research, as this study has only captured the experiences of 20 nurses, so you can't generalise across a hospital. The sample size was appropriate though for that qualitative study, so it's great to see these limitations acknowledged. So hopefully you found this talk helpful, and you can see how critical appraisal is a systematic process. I went through the article highlighting key text linked to titles, aims, methods, analysis, discussion and conclusion. And I was making a judgment, assessing, evaluating the paper, but also justifying my points. This open access paper was positively appraised because it's clearly written, but not all papers will be. So hopefully now you know what to look out for and can perhaps be more focused and critical when you appraise future studies in the future. If you're critically appraising a paper for a module, I would suggest you read and collect some key references linked to those key areas, such as sampling, for example, data collection, before you start writing ethical approval. And this makes it easier if you've got the literature there to back up your pointers. It's all stuff you can prepare before you start writing. Do check out my videos. I've got lots more on my YouTube channel. They're all free if you're interested. If you need the references, I've got Critical Appraisal Skills Programme, and you would get that on the website. I can't put the HTTPS web link because I can't, it takes you off YouTube, but you can find it very easily. And then Honk et al., the Mixed Methods Appraisal Tool. I've got Morley and Cathler's evidence-based nursing publication, How to Appraise Qualitative Research, which is very helpful for references to underpin your appraisal. If you have any questions at all, don't forget to put them in the YouTube comments, or if you want to say how you felt the video went, or if you want any of the future videos, let me know. Or you can DM me on Twitter or on my website. And I've also got 2 books that you might be interested in: How to Thrive as a Newly Registered Nurse and How to Prepare for Interviews and Develop Your Career as a Nurse or Midwife. So I wish you good luck with all your appraisals.